Okay, so we're going to start with homework 1 notes. You can find these notes under content in our Brightspace. And homework 1 notes, or homework 2 or homework 3. All right, so we're going to first start with factoring. The first step to factoring any polynomial, no matter how many no parentheses may start with the negative sign. So if the expression begins with the negative sign, you should always factor out the negative of the GCF. Okay, so like in this particular case, it's negative. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the 36 into all three of them. That would be 6, but because this leading term is negative, we are going to factor out a negative 6. Okay. 4 x's here, 2 here, and 1 here. They all have 1 in them. So that is going to be our x terms. And then the same thing with the y. This has 3 of them, this has 1, and this has 1. So you take the variable with the lowest exponent, and that's why x to the first and y to the first. Now, to get inside the parentheses, all you're going to really do, or all you're doing, is you're dividing each term by the negative 6xy. Now, I don't do this when I'm working the problem, but just when I'm teaching it, okay? I know that negative 6 times negative 6, times a positive 6 is going to give us a negative 36. But if I divided this, look, that will give us a positive 6. Then I have, remember, we're dividing, so we subtract our exponents. So we have x to the third, y to the second. Okay. Here, I'm going to divide by a negative 6 again. It'll give us a positive 2. Okay. Now I subtract my exponents and I get x, and then subtract my exponents and I get, it's y to the 0, which is just 1, so we don't need that. Okay, they cancel each other out. And right here, this, do not put 0. Okay, when these cancel each other out, when they reduce to a 1. Same thing here, and same thing here. So 1 times 1 times 1. So it's really, and it's going to be a positive 1. Okay, you can't have, it can't just disappear, because now you can check this. If I was to distribute this negative 6xy out, I should end up with the initial problem that I had. I should end up, oops, sorry, it's going to be kind of messy now. But when I multiply it out, I should end up with this, negative 6xy times 6x cubed y squared. This gives me negative 36. X times x cubed gives me x to the fourth, and y times y squared gives us y to the third. Then negative 6xy times 2x, that's going to give us negative 12x squared y. And then this times 1 is going to give us a negative 6xy. Okay, in number 2, what we're going to do right here is we're going to look at all 3 terms. There's 3 terms. Here's your minus sign. This is our first term, this is our second term, and this is our third. What do you see that they all have in common? They all have an x plus 2 in common. So that's what I'm going to pull out. That's our GCF. So again, it's like dividing each term by this. Now you don't have to do this step. I'm only doing it because some people have trouble with this. And this is how I can show what to get in our other set of parentheses. This cancels to give us 1. 1 times x squared is x squared. This cancels to give us 1, and we have negative x. And this cancels to give us negative 9. Okay, so pretty easy. Now, when you see something with 4 terms, the best way to do it is by grouping. Grouping is a method of factoring polynomials with 4 terms. You're going to split the polynomial into 2-term portions and factor out the GCF of each part. If the portions in parentheses of both sets match, then factor out that as your GCF. Okay. If they don't match, then you need to check your work. Chances are you've done something wrong, but there are times where things do not factor. Either the problem does not factor by grouping, rarely in this course, or you have made a mistake, much more common in this course. Okay, so right here, we've got 4 terms. I'm going to group these two, and I'm going to group these two. Now, when I'm doing this problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's look at this first part. What is my GCF? What will go into 6a cubed and 21a squared? Well, 6 is the largest number that goes into 6 and negative 20. Well, let's try that one again. Sorry about that. Let's try 3. And then we have a cubed and a squared. So a squared is my least common denominator, factor, sorry. Okay, now, so what I'm going to do is I'm dividing this. What times 3a squared is going to give us 6a cubed, and that's going to be 2a. This is going to give us minus 7. Okay, right here, the largest number that goes into both is 2. What I'm left with is 2a minus 7, because remember, I'm dividing both of these by 2. So now, notice this, they both have this in common, so I'm going to pull that out. That's our GCF, and what I'm left with is 3a squared plus 2. Now, let's take a look right here. Now again, at any time, you can pause the video and try this on your own. So I'm going to group this, and I'm going to group this. Be real careful when you have a minus sign. Our GCF that goes into both of these is a squared. I am left with a minus 4, because a squared times a gives us a cubed. A squared times a negative 4 gives us negative 4a squared. Now, right here, when this is negative, remember we need to factor out a negative because of parentheses. When in here, this can't lead with a negative symbol, negative sign. So the largest number that goes into 3 and 12 is 3, but because this is negative, I'm going to factor out a negative 3, and I'm left with a minus 4. Now, what I'm going to do is pull out. You'll notice that both terms have an a minus 4. If they didn't match, we'd have done something wrong. Let me do that in red. So they both have the a minus 4 in common. So if I factor that out, this disappears, and I'm left with a squared. If I factor out an a minus 4 there, I'm left with a minus 3. The only thing I'm going to tell you to do is be real careful, because when we get into more factoring, sometimes you can factor again, but not in this case. You can't. And we're done. Okay. Back side. Okay, guess and check. This is my method. Okay, this is what I do. I call it trial and error, but some people have a hard time with this, so they may like AC method, which we'll go into. I just am faster at this. And the reason I'm fast at it is because of practice. This is the only way you get good at factoring. Practice, 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 practice. Okay? So right here, now be real careful. We got 2 sets of parentheses. these first terms come from here. The only way I can get x squared is x times x. Now, these last terms, these two right here, come from this. What I want to know is this middle term has something to do with it. But these numbers have to multiply together to give us negative 12. Okay? So one sign has to be positive and the other one has to be negative. I'm just going to put it in there. I do not have any notes in front of me. It's just guessing. Okay? I'm just checking it. So how can I get 12? Okay, I can get it by saying 1 times negative 12 or negative 1 times a positive 12. 2 times negative 6 or negative 2 times a positive 6. And 3 times a negative 4 or negative 3 times 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm always going to try what I call these middle terms first. But I already know the answer to this, so I'm going to just try this because I want it to be wrong. Okay, I'm just telling you. But here's what I do. I'm just going to put the positive 2 here and the negative 6 here. Now, where does this come into play? Remember on FOIL, that middle term comes from outsides plus insides, or what I call OI, okay? Outsides plus insides, or OI. So to see, I need to know what multiplied will give us negative 12, when added will give us negative 1. So when I check my answer, this gives me a negative 6x. This gives me a positive 2x. Well, that gives me negative 4x, so it can't be this. And it doesn't matter if I switch the signs and have a negative 2 here and a positive 6. It doesn't matter, okay? So I know this one's not going to work. I rarely try this one first. I always try this one first, but I'm pretty good at factoring and I knew what the answer was already. So again, this comes from here. The first terms come from the x squared, so it's x times x. The last terms come from the negative 12. When multiplied, it'll give us negative 12. So I'm just going to try positive 3 and negative 4. It could be negative here and a positive here. So now I'm going to do outsides plus insides, or the OI. This gives me negative 4x, positive 3x. That gives me a negative 1x. So that's my answer. And that's why I said I was going to try the 6 and the 2 first, because I knew the answer was 3 and 4. Okay, in this case right here, we don't have a z squared, and I'm really bad about this. Okay, but because it's not that I'm bad. I have a bad habit of not factoring out a monomial first. But in this case, I'm going to factor out the GCF. They all will have a negative 2, because again, we want our leading coefficient to be positive inside our parentheses. And then we can factor out a z as well. Okay, I always do my z's like this so you can tell the difference between 2's and z's. So now I'm left with 2z squared plus, because we're factoring out a negative 2, 11z plus 15. Okay, so sometimes this is as far as we can go, and this is factoring. We factored, it looks different, so we're done. Okay, but in this case, I'm sure this will factor further. Okay. Now, again, these first terms here come from here. The only way we can get that is 2z times z. The last terms come from here. Now the nice thing is because this is positive, they rather both have to be positive or they both have to be negative. Well, the only way we can get a positive 11z is for them to be positive. So it can be 1 times 15 or 3 times 5. Now, be careful. You're going to go, well, no, they don't add to give 11. Well, remember, we have this 2 involved here, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try this first, and I'm just going to plug them in. That's why it's called guess and check. I'm going to put plus 3, even though I know this is wrong, and plus 5. But if I was a student, I probably wouldn't see that. Because I have so much practice, I know what the answer, I know where to put these numbers. Okay, remember, this comes from outsides plus insides. So you'll notice this gives me positive 10z. This gives me positive 3z. Well, that gives me 13z, not 11. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch these 3 and the 5. Because this 2 is what's going to add a little bit more to it because we got to multiply the outsides together. And I'm going to put the 3 right here. So now, when I do this, this gives me 6z. This gives me 5z, the OI part. That's what gives me the 11z. But now don't forget, you have to have that negative 2z out there, because remember, if we were to multiply this all out, it's going to give us this. If we leave this off, that part off, it just gives us this when we multiply. Okay, AC method. It's not my favorite, but it is for a lot of you all. So we show it, and it's not that I hate it, it just takes longer. I just like guess and check better. So the AC method is, this is our A, this is our C, so we're going to say A times C. In this case, A is 8, and C is negative 6. So here's what we're going to do. We multiply those, and we get negative 48. Now, we need the factors, meaning multiplication, of negative 48 that add to our middle term. That add, or the sum, of 13. Okay. Now, I kind of go in a U shape on this. What I'm talking about is, first of all, I'm not going to really worry which one's negative and which one's positive. I just know one has to be negative, one has to be positive. So I'm going to say 1 and negative 48. Okay? It could be negative 1 and 48. I don't care. It doesn't really matter. This, though, that adds together to give negative 47. That's not, and it's not going to matter if I change my signs. It's going to give me a positive 47. So the next factor is 2. 2 and negative 24. When I add those together, I get negative 22. I'm getting closer. Now, I know it's wrong because my larger number has to be positive in order to be 13. So, but let's just keep going. 3 and negative 16. Well, this gives me a negative 13, and I need to be a positive 13. So all I really have to do is I have to change this to a negative 3 and a positive 16, and now I have 13. Okay, and when I was talking about the U shape, see how I go 1, 2, 3, and then I'd go 4 and 12, but I don't need to because I've got, if I wanted to, I could go negative 4 and 12, and negative 6 and 8. And see how it kind of makes a U shape. It goes smaller to larger and then larger to smaller. Okay, so, and in reality, all of my first terms should have been negative and my second terms should have been positive. That way, you'd end up with positive numbers over here. Okay, and that's what we want. Now, what do we do with it? So we found these two are what gives us this middle term. So here's what you do. We bring down our 8y squared, and we bring down this negative 6. What we do is we replace this 13y with negative 3y and 16y. So it's minus 3y plus 16y. So what we did was we replaced that 13 with what we found over here. Now we have 4 terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor by grouping. Largest, our GCF here is y. We are left with 8y minus 3. Our largest number right here that we can factor out is 2. And I'm left with 8y minus 3. Notice both terms have an 8y minus 3. So I pull that out. And what I'm left with is y plus 2. Now you could do this. When you pull this out, that goes away. And you're left with y plus 2. Now if I multiplied this out, I would end up with our original problem. Okay. Perfect square trinomials. All right. This one, time and time again, we are going to use this later on. Now you can use the guess and check method. You can use the AC method. But it's really much easier if you can recognize that this is a perfect square and so is this. Okay? This is a perfect square and so is this. So the first thing you want to check for is it a perfect square trinomial? They both are, because of course that's what we're practicing. So this one comes from this rule right here. So basically, and I kind of use the guess and check at the same time as this rule. First of all, I can get this by 1x and 4x or 2x and 2x. Because they're perfect squares, I'm going to try the 2x and the 2x. Well, this is a perfect square. It's rather 5 times 5 or negative 5 times negative 5. But because this is negative, I'm going to put negative 5's in there. Okay? Let's make sure. Oh, because remember, these two come from the 4x squared. These two have to multiply to give 25, which is right. The OI part comes here, outsides plus insides. Negative 10x plus negative 10x gives us negative 20x. Now the only thing we need to do is shorten our answer. We have two of these, and we're multiplying them by each other, so it's squared. Right here, perfect square, 13y. 13y gives us 169y squared. This is a perfect square, 3z and 3z. The only thing we need to check for, this is positive, so these have to be positive. Let's make sure that we get 78xy, xz. Ugh. Let's try yz. Oh my goodness. It's getting late. Well, it is 12:30 at night, so I'm a night owl, by the way. Right here, outsides plus insides. The outsides, this gives us 39yz. The insides gives us 39yz. Add those together, and we get the 78yz. So this was our answer. Oops, sorry. We can take it one step further, and we can say 13y plus 3z squared. Now, we're done. Okay, this is my favorite. You should love these when you see them. They're two terms. It has to be two terms with a minus sign. You're going to look for the difference of two squares. Okay, difference of squares. So in this particular case right here, perfect square, it has to be a minus sign. If there's not a minus sign and it's a plus sign, it will not factor. So square root of 25x squared, we're going to get that by saying 5x and 5x. The only way you can get a negative is one's positive, one's negative, and 9 is 3 times 3. And that's all there is to it. Now, this is close, but it's not a perfect square, okay? This, we're going to have to look for the GCF. So what's the largest number that goes into 72? That goes into 98. Oh, and I can't think. Let me take a look here. Oh, Lord, I'm having trouble tonight. Okay, it's going to be... Hold on. Let's try... Oh, let's see if it's 2. I'm thinking it's got to be bigger than that. Yeah, it's 2. Oh my God, I'm trying every other number. So 2 goes into 72 36 times minus 49y squared. Excuse me, sorry. I thought it was going to be a larger number. So keep that 2, otherwise it'll be wrong. Perfect square, 6 and 6. 1's plus, 1's minus, 7y and 7y. And that's it. Now, these are some of my favorites. I like to put these on test. Hint, hint. So pay attention. Perfect square, z squared plus 9, z squared minus 9, because z squared gives a z to the 4th. Now, this would be fine, but if you're doing this in ALEKS, it's going to be wrong, and here's why. This one's okay. It won't factor because it has a plus sign. They're both perfect squares, but there's a plus sign between it, so it stays. This second one, however, always look to see if you can't factor it any further. Perfect square, so it is going to factor as z plus 3, z minus 3. Now we're finished. And that's the difference of 2 squares. It's always 2 terms with a minus sign in the middle. Okay, that is it for homework 1.